Sometimes the things you see in the shadows are more than just shadows. I used to live in a haunted house. In fact, we were in a book called the Pinocchio Ghost Book. A huge family was massacred by the Indians, and their souls are still wandering. We had many, many experiences with the children of the family. We started using a Ouija board, and I found a spirit, a little boy who was killed with an axe by a man he thought was his father. A few years later, I decided to use my board again. The spirit located me again and led me to his grave. Interestingly enough, on the gravestone was a carving of a little boy with a man behind him, and behind the man, an Indian with what was probably their version of an axe back then. I believe the Indian killed the boy, but the boy thought it was his father. When I reported back to him, he seemed to be at peace with this information, and I have never heard from him since. I've communicated with spirits for years, but this was the first interactive type of experience I ever had. A friend had a blind dinner date at a guy's apartment and was afraid to go alone, so she roped me into coming along and being set up with his roomie. After dinner, they wanted to play with their Ouija. I refused. It was exactly 9 months from the day my father had died, and I was feeling pretty out of it. I was wearing jewelry he'd given me, as well as one of his t-shirts and one of his sweaters to feel closer to him. The room was dark, and I began to feel as if the oxygen was leaving the room. They asked the Ouija who it wanted to speak to, and it began to spell out my childhood nickname. Cheryl didn't know it because she was a fairly new friend. She'd never even known my dad. I made a noise and said no, then told Cheryl I wanted to leave right then and there. They asked who it was, and it spelt my father's name, and again, no one there knew it. I got upset and said I knew it was lying. The candles blew out, and Cheryl screamed because she said she could not move her hands off of the pointer, and neither could the boys. They were dumbfounded. I began to be choked by an invisible entity, and I was writhing on the floor and calling for my dad to help me. Meanwhile, our friend had been sent to pick us up at 8 p.m. for us to go out with him. He heard us screaming. He came in, and everything seemed to rush out of the room. He dragged me out and locked me in the car, and then went back in for Cheryl. We never spoke of it again. The guys tried to call us and apologize and get us to talk about the incident. We told them to leave us alone. I feel very strange telling you this, but this was an incident that happened 2 years ago and still leaves me perplexed. My best friend and I had been using a Ouija for 4 years before this happened. We usually contacted the same spirits who claimed that they had been our soulmates in many lives. Because of this, they tended to get a little overprotective, moody, and act like typical guys when it comes to real men in my life. Usually, they would claim that if I liked a guy, it was because he was an incarnate of one of them. But with one particular boyfriend, the spirits had a big problem. On many occasions, Ervim, the most protective of the spirits, told me I had to break up with my boyfriend, that he was a demonic sort of spirit that would do eternal harm to mine. I ignored Ervim, saying that I couldn't break off a perfectly good relationship based on the jealousy of a spirit, but Ervim persisted. One day, he asked me to look at my drawing pad. I looked, and found that one page in my new book had become wet and had dried, leaving behind traces of a yellowish substance. Upon tracing lines around the yellow impressions, I realized he had left me a note written in the angelic alphabet, as seen in Buckland's book. I went home and translated the alphabet, and it read, "Beware bats." That phrase meant nothing to my best friend, but it did mean something to me. My boyfriend, the very one Ervim was warning me about, was an avid collector of bat paraphernalia and even had a bat tattooed on his back. The really creepy thing about all this is that I finally did break up with my boyfriend because he told me that he believed he was a fallen angel and that he could produce an ethereal alter ego to avenge his sorrows. The point is that my boyfriend did turn out to be psychotic, if not demonic, and Ervim had given me the physical proof to believe so. No one but myself, in my immediate circle, is familiar with the angelic alphabet. No one knew about the bats. No one had a chance to draw in my art book. And with what? I am in my late 30s and now living in Massachusetts where I grew up. I was a middle child of 5 in a very close family. When we were really young, my 2 younger sisters and I were always fascinated with the unknown. We would look in the obituaries in the newspaper to see who had recently passed away, and we would have seances in our garage with some other local neighborhood kids. Usually nothing would happen, but a couple of times, some weird things happened that we just could not explain. When my sisters and I were in high school, we learned about Ouija boards. We bought one and began to play with it. 2 of us would get on it, and the other would write everything down. At first it was fun. We talked to several different spirits that told us where they were from and about their families. This went on for weeks. Then, gradually, things started getting a little scary. Eventually, every time we got on the board, the same spirit would come on, who was not very nice. He told us he was the devil, and he was going to get us somehow. He called himself Zozo. When a friend of ours confronted our priest about this name, he got very angry and told us we should not be playing with Ouija boards. They were not toys, and we could get into trouble. He gave his Sunday sermon on the subject. Needless to say, we stopped playing with it. While still in high school, one of my sister's best friends lost her sister in a van accident. She and her sister were very close. She knew of our adventures with our Ouija board and begged my sister to let her come over and use it to talk to her deceased sister. Hesitantly, my sister sat down with her and contacted her sister with the board. Her friend bawled and told her sister how much she loved her and missed her. She didn't want to live anymore without her and wished she could be with her. About 2 weeks later, my sister's friend died. In a van accident. Exactly the way that her sister had died. My sister took the Ouija board and put it out with the trash, and none of us has touched one since. One night, my brother and I were playing with my new Ouija board, and it didn't take long for the entity to come. As soon as it was there, I felt this strange feeling come over me. It felt as if something was inside of me. It got hard for me to breathe, but I didn't say anything. We asked the entity if it was good or evil, and it spelled out, evil. Right then, I knew something was wrong, because the entity was getting upset. It got harder and harder for me to breathe, until finally it felt like something pushed me, and it was over. Ever since that night, strange things have been happening in my home. Doors shut by themselves. I hear strange noises and see shadows in the middle of the night. Although this experience scared me, I still bring out my Ouija and talk to entities, even the upset ones. I ask them what their problem is and see if there's anything I can do to help. I just hope I never run into that same entity that tried to choke me. About 20 years ago, my friend and I decided to start playing around with the Ouija board I received for Christmas. In the interest of fair play, we did it as the box suggested, sitting on chairs facing each other with the board on our knees. We closed our eyes and had my sister act as secretary, recording each letter. My sister was about 13 and was not making anything up, as different friends also stood in for her when she wasn't around. Within minutes, we began to receive sentences that made sense. Eventually, the board told us we were communicating with someone named Savatu. He said he was an Incan warrior and that he wanted to talk to us. My friend and I became addicted to this game, and for weeks we would sit in my room, light incense, smoke cigarettes, and have sessions. Savatu would tell us jokes and ask us questions. After a few weeks, the nature of the messages changed. They became somewhat intimate, menacing, and rude. One night, Savatu told us he wanted us to come away with him. During that same session, the pointer flew out of our hands and hit the wall. At that point, we got freaked out and decided to put the Ouija away for a while. I began having nightmares, and so did my friend. I took to sleeping with a crucifix on and a Bible in bed with me. I began to fear the Ouija board, and my friend said she would take it to her boyfriend's house because he wanted to mess around with it. She was driving out to his house with the board on the seat beside her, and her car began to smoke and stalled on a dirt road. She got out of the car and threw the Ouija board into a cornfield, then got back in the car. It started, and she drove safely to his house. I was very fearful for about a year or so afterward that I was being haunted, but eventually the fear went away. I have never again touched a Ouija, and do not intend to. Me and my friends Selena and Martha, Selena's sister Jasmine, and our common friend Emma. We are 5 in a group. One night at 7:30 p.m., we all decided to have a party at my house. My parents had gone out for an important meeting and would not return until the next day. All of us had decided to have fun. Martha had brought a Ouija board along with her. I asked her, "Why have you brought this with you?" To which she replied, "We must include them in our party as well." We partied hard, and then at 12 a.m., we decided to play with the Ouija board. We placed the board on a table and lighted some candles. Selena started the session. "Is anyone there who would like to communicate with us?" Selena asked. There was no reply. Selena spoke again. "Don't hesitate to talk." Again, there was no reply. We got bored after asking 21 times and decided to watch TV instead. As the girls had to stay in my house for the night, they went to change their clothes. When it was finally Martha's turn to change, she went to the washroom. Suddenly, we heard Martha scream and we rushed to see what had happened. Martha was crying, and she said, "I just now saw myself walking across the washroom." At first, we didn't understand what she meant, and we thought that she was trying to scare us. But then, she showed us a scratch mark on her arm, which was not possible for her to make. We then thought to ask the Ouija board again. This time, I decided to ask the questions. "If anybody is here, please tell us. Is anybody there?" Strangely, this time, the board decided to answer back. "Yes." "Who are you?" The board pointed to the letter D. "D who?" The board slowly spelt out the word, "Death." "What do you want from us?" "Blood. Your flesh as well," the board answered. and this was enough for us. We all left everything and ran towards the door, but the door did not open, and we realized that we had been locked in my own house. Some more supernatural things started happening. The lights were flickering, and things were being thrown here and there. We somehow managed to hide in one of the rooms, but to no avail. Martha got very angry, and she asked with a loud scream, "Why don't you leave us alone?" To which the Ouija replied, "Your screams make me powerful." Selena, in frustration, burned the Ouija board with a gas cylinder. The moment the Ouija board was burned, the front door opened with a loud noise, and without wasting any time, we ran out of the house. But the thing that happened after that is the most horrible part of the story. We all got out, but when Martha was about to step out the door slammed shut. For a second, everything was dead silent, but after that, we heard her screams from the inside. We banged on the door and called out her name. After some time, our neighbors came and we managed to break down the door. We found Martha lying unconscious on the floor. We took her to a hospital. After that day, Martha never spoke a word again. Later, we found that the spirit whom we had called through the Ouija board was David, who was Selena's half-brother. He died due to an accident. David was never good when he was alive, or dead. Martha was admitted to an insane asylum, and even today we don't know what exactly happened on that night. But whenever I look into her eyes, I get shivers all around my body, and I feel something horrible had happened. My family and I ended up moving from that house. Looking back, I have to ask myself the question, why did we do that? Because all of our lives have changed. I still feel a bad presence around me. I have been connected with a spirit named D in the past. He said he was trying to hurt me, and that he was evil. Ever since I was done with that session, every spirit after that wanted to escape my board by attempting to count down through the numbers and going to corners of the board and spelling out. I earlier today scanned my Ouija board and the letter D was scratched into it. I still decided to play and connected with a spirit named C, who claimed he was good, and he warned me and my friend that D was around and he wanted to harm us. C also said that he connected with us to protect us. We thanked him for the information and closed the session. Later that night, we again attempted to play. We once again connected with C, and he said that prayer will make D more mad, and my friend asked if D was around us, and C spelt out R-U-N, run. We quickly closed the board and ran to our friend's house, who closed the portal. To close this portal, we had to play once again. Our friend, Andrew, asked the questions, and we were the players. The spirit that connected with us once again was C. He said that D wanted out, and that he will possibly try to make him stay in the portal longer. We put it to goodbye, and I am saying goodbye to my Ouija board this night. Whoever says it isn't real needs to experience it for themselves. I always started with a prayer and the burning of a sage. There is a possible chance of playing it and having something dangerous happening. I need to know if anyone else has connected with a spirit named D. I have had 3 encounters with Zozo. The first time I ever played with a Ouija board, I had not heard about Zozo, and I wanted to prove that Ouija boards were fake. So I said, "Are there any spirits willing to communicate?" And the planchette moved to yes. So I then asked for its name, and it spelt Zozo. So I said goodbye. A year later, I told my friends about it, and they said they wanted to do it, so we all did. Once we started the session, I asked the same question: "Are there any spirits willing to communicate?" Again, the planchette moved to yes. So I then asked, "Are you from the sun or the moon?" And the planchette went to moon. We then asked, "What's your name?" And it spelt out Zozo. I was going to say goodbye, but then my friends asked, "Are you going to hurt us?" And Zozo said, "Yes." We all decided then to say goodbye. We decided to try it again the next day, and the same thing happened, except that time we said goodbye before going too far. Ever since beginning these sessions, some weird things have occurred in my house, but I still continue to play with the Ouija board. My siblings and I had an encounter with the paranormal through a Ouija board last year. My 3 older sisters, Sam, Karen, and Sarah, had come over that day to help me unpack in my new apartment, where, in a box, my grandmother had given me a glow-in-the-dark Ouija board. The girls were completely fascinated with the whole paranormal aspect, so they had invited my older brother to come around and play with us. We played for about an hour before I had decided to give up. We weren't getting anywhere, so what was the point? As I readied myself to move my hands away, the planchette started to go crazy, moving around in circles erratically. "Whoa!" my 4 siblings cried in unison. I sat still, completely in shock and scared. I used to be a skeptic until I realized something. It wasn't possible for all 5 of us to move the planchette in the same direction. Then, when it started to answer our questions, spelling out in full sentences, I realized this was truly happening. I simply asked in a meek voice, "Who are you?" "Zozo," it replied. Nathan, our brother, almost cried from shock. He explained that he'd heard of Zozo and that he was apparently showing up all over the world. He was a demon. I told everyone we had to say goodbye, trusting my brother as he was almost never wrong. My sisters refused and started asking questions, like if anyone we knew was going to die. The board spelt out Aurora. We had no idea who Aurora was, so they didn't panic and started asking how this Aurora would die. "Inside," Zozo spelt out. Inside what? The board started moving erratically then, spelling out my name over and over again. I finally convinced my sisters and brother to say goodbye. About 4 months later, I found out I was pregnant. I had forgotten all about my experience with Zozo. Finally, I had found happiness with my husband and my unborn child. Just as I went into labor, my midwife explained that my daughter, who I was going to call Aurora, didn't make it. She was born stillborn. My precious little girl. I advise you to stay away from the Ouija board. I know that the mystery and disbelief can draw you in, but it isn't worth it. I paid for it in the worst possible way. So please, heed my warning. This happened on the Halloween night of 2008, and is not my own experience, but that of my brother, sister, and close friends. It is long, so bear with me. I lived in Canberra during my childhood, and Canberra is known to be the most haunted location in Australia, given its history. Growing up, I never took the paranormal seriously. However, my sister and her 3 friends did. In fact, they were all Wiccans. On occasion, they would try and contact spirits in the closest cemetery at daytime, but would only experience slight things like really cold air or hearing footsteps. On Halloween 2008, they decided to go down to the cemetery at midnight, and my brother and his friend also went along. They were all around the age of 13 to 19. I was 14. For some stubborn and stupid reason, I decided to stay home. I now know that I will regret that decision for the rest of my life. This was definitely a very haunted place, and it is also worth mentioning that it is one of the oldest churches in Australia, being built in 1840. It is called St. John's the Baptist Church. Excitedly, they walked down, but not really expecting to see anything amazing. When they reached the cemetery, it was all serious business. They sat down in a circle and held hands, with a candle in the center. Then my sister read something aloud from a book. When it ended, they were all looking around for about 10 minutes, and one of my sister's friends was the first to see something. This thing was glowing a gray color, and it seemed to be fading in and out of focus. It was 20 meters away at the side of the churchyard. They were just watching it for a few minutes, whispering to each other. Then my sister and her 3 friends started slowly walking towards it. As they got closer, it became clearer and clearer that it was a ghost of a young girl in 19th century clothing. They slowly recognized the details and folds in her dress and hair as she was twirling her arms and spinning. They just stared at the figure, silently smiling in awe. They were not threatened at all. She was not aggressive in the least. They always tell me how amazing it was, and I'm still so jealous. My brother and his friend started approaching it slowly as well by the hand gestures of the others. Next to the ghost, there was an old big tree, and they noticed the dirt around it was being flown up in the air, and they started hearing this strange, growling sort of noise, like a dying animal coming from that direction. Something started to form there. It slowly took the shape of a humanoid on all 4s, and was appearing in and out of focus. The girl ghost had disappeared. For some strange reason, it seemed to be digging in the ground very frantically, almost like trying to find something that was buried under the tree. They were happy the seance worked, until now. As the 2 boys cautiously crept up to them before seeing what it was, the strange ghost had stopped and everything went quiet. Suddenly, it looked straight up at them and saw them as some sort of threat. With no warning, it started to crawl and float towards them very aggressively while making a screeching sound. On this path, it disappeared and then reappeared, getting closer as it did. I would imagine tears forming in their eyes as their version of reality was bending. Never a nice feeling. I told them that they should have stayed to see what it wanted. They replied by saying things like, "No way, this thing definitely wanted to hurt us. We all started feeling tremendous fear, and there was no way we would have stayed any longer." As they ran out, excited yet terrified, my brother was the only one to look back, and he said it was still chasing them, while the other girl ghost reappeared in the same spot. Well, they did not go back for months after that. The images were still too vivid. Personally, I would have gone back to check it out the same night, along with a lot of other things. When they did call Mom to pick them up, they explained everything they saw to us when they got home. At first, I did not believe them. Then I got a look at my brother's face. It was so pale white, it was almost like there was no blood in his head at all, and they all had terrified looks on their faces. When they were telling me all this, they held back tears, yet they were really excited at the same time. I had no other choice but to believe them. Often it crosses my mind that the ghost of the young girl was luring them closer to the evil-looking ghost, But why? 1 year later, they went again, and this time I went with them. It was not half as successful, though. I did, after the seance, walk around by myself for a few minutes. I felt very uneasy and threatened for no reason at that moment. I remember vividly seeing something white and ghostly float over my head for about 3 seconds. Walking away from that area, I stayed about 10 meters away from everybody else looking around the graveyard for anything interesting, but saw nothing. After about 5 minutes later, I swear I saw something unfocused that caught my eye. It was wobbling and flickering like a pale green flame. It was around the same area that the ghost of the young girl was last year. It was so captivating and hypnotic. I looked at it with a smile for about 30 seconds, then walked to the others and said, "I think there is something over there." So we walked towards it. I thought, finally, I can have this experience. But sadly, it didn't last that long. As we approached it, it slowly seemed to be different. Surprisingly, all that was there was an old, tall gravestone. Just a gravestone. We felt silly. We all stayed there for about 15 minutes and didn't see anything, only heard the odd noises from inside the church, like someone was moving heavy objects. When we walked home, everybody was saying things like, "Well, that was a dud." I felt angry and upset. To this day, I still wonder what I saw. It couldn't be just a gravestone. They don't fade in and out, glow, move, or change shape. I believe it was a ghost. Sometimes I drive down to the cemetery just to take pictures, hoping to catch something interesting. Out of the 58 I have taken, there is only one picture of a ghost. I have had more experiences, but that's for another time. I'm a late blind. I never used to get scared of any ghost stories, and I always enjoyed catching up with any horror movie. My friends considered me lucky because I was spared from watching the horrifying scenes. I never believed in ghosts and paranormal activities, not until August 2015. We are an Anglo-Indian family, and usually it has been our custom to visit our family bungalow for any special occasion. This time it was my cousin's wedding, and a party was thrown at the bungalow. We were gathered over there, and the music was being played at full blast. As I cannot see, I was slightly getting disoriented, and I requested my cousin Elvis to take me to a quiet place where I could relax. He took me to a lawn, which was at the backyard of the bungalow. We were talking to each other when one of my aunts called out for Elvis. He told me that he would come back, and he left. I was standing there. It was quite cold, and I could vaguely hear the music from far away. Suddenly, the swing in the backyard started swaying. I was wondering who it was, and I asked if someone was there. There was no reply. I thought that the swing must have moved because of the wind. I started feeling uncomfortable after a while. It was as though someone was watching me. I started feeling very cold, and I sensed a presence standing next to me. "Darkus," that person whispered in my ears. I was frightened, because I had never heard such a strange voice ever in my life. I was demanding that person to tell me who it was, but there was no reply. I was trying to find my way out to the party area because I was terribly scared. Just then, Elvis came back to find me in a panic state. He asked me if I was okay, and I questioned him if anyone else was there around me. He told me that there was no one except for me and him. I requested him to take me away from there, and I didn't speak a word after that. Even after that date, that experience gives me a chill in my spine. I can't forget it. I'm not sure if it was a paranormal presence or my cousin's prank on me, but whatever it was scary. I haven't shared it with anyone in my family because I am sure that they will not believe me. In 1914, the Newfoundland sailed up to the ice with a crew of 250 men. On March 30th, 77 men went out on the ice to kill seals. A mighty storm came up while the men were out that lasted 2 days, and the men could not make it back to the ship. When the storm ceased, other ships came and helped the crew of the Newfoundland search for the missing men. 72 were found dead, and 5 were missing, presumed drowned. The ship sailed home in sorrow, and didn't go to the ice at all the next year. She was considered to be unlucky. To break the curse, the ship was rebuilt and changed so that she would drown no more men. Her new name was the San Blanford, and she was sent to the ice 2 years after the terrible storm. On the 30th of March, she met up with another ship called the Terra Nova. As dusk fell, a fog rolled in, and the crew of the San Blanford heard the Terra Nova blowing her whistle. This was a signal that she still had men out on the ice. As was customary, the crew of the San Blanford started blowing their whistle, and those above deck could hear voices calling out from the ice, and presumed they belonged to the sailors from the Terra Nova. The two ships kept up their signals until 10 p.m., when the voices ceased, and all were presumed safely aboard ship. The next morning, a sailor from the San Blanford boarded the Terra Nova to conduct some business. The captain of the ship immediately asked the sailor what time the members of the San Blanford crew had gotten aboard the previous night. The sailor was puzzled.
"We didn't have anyone out on the ice, sir."
But the captain and his crew swore that they had seen 5 men board the San Blanford shortly before 10 p.m. When the sailor returned to the San Blanford, he reported the incident to his captain. The captain took him quietly aside and told him that the report was true. A few members of the night crew had seen 5 men climb aboard the San Blanford shortly before 10 p.m. The men were wearing tattered clothing that looked as if it had been ripped and worn out by the waves of the sea, and the crew could see right through their shining bodies. One of the sailors on duty that evening had been on the Newfoundland when she lost the 77 men 2 years ago that very night. He had recognized the faces of the ghosts as those belonging to the 5 men who were presumed drowned. Their spirits had finally returned to the ship from which they had been lost, and could now rest in peace. I used to live in a house that backs up to a big public open space where there are hiking trails. Lots of joggers and people walking their dogs. Anyway, one night, I had a kind of creepy dream that an old lady came into my room and was trying to get me to come outside. The dream woke me up, so I got some water and turned off my fan because it was cold, and then I fell asleep again. I went right back into the same dream with this old lady coming into my room and calmly saying, "You have to go outside now." I kept telling her no, that it was too cold. I woke up again, and my fan was on. I figured I must have just thought I turned it off, or the button got stuck. So I got up, turned the fan off again, and went back to sleep. This time, I had the same exact dream, except she was much older looking in this one, and was really agitated. She was yelling, "Go outside! You must go outside!" I got up in the dream, and followed her to the hallway. When I got to the hallway, she wasn't there, and then I woke up, and I was actually standing in the hallway. I have never, ever walked around in my sleep before or after this. Also, my fan was on when I went back to my room. At this point, I was freaked out, so I got something to eat and watched TV for a couple of hours. I went back to bed around 5 or 6, and the dream didn't come back. The messed up part is, a couple of days later, I saw that there were police cars in the open space, and when I asked my mom what happened, she said they had found an older woman who was reported missing a few days before. She must have had a heart attack or a stroke or something on the trail by my house, and they had found the body. My boyfriend lives in a Civil War-era plantation home on a huge farm. The place has a weird vibe to it. None of the animals will come upstairs. If you bring them up, they will start shaking and dart back downstairs. My boyfriend won't even go in one of the bedrooms. Slave shackles are still hanging up in the basement. The place has apparently been pretty dormant as far as paranormal activity goes for the past year. I've had a couple odd experiences. My boyfriend says that it always gets more active around the holidays, though. In November, right before Thanksgiving, I was staying the night with him. I was about to fall asleep, and I heard something outside. At first, I thought it was the pack of coyotes that roam around the back of the farm, but I heard it again a few seconds after the first time, and it was definitely not a coyote. I immediately woke up and was aware of my surroundings, and I heard it again. It was a woman outside, calling for a man named John. She sounded so panicked and distressed. I heard her call a few more times, and I could hear the voice moving around the yard. I was creeped out, but I cuddled up to my boyfriend and went back to sleep. When I told him about it in the morning, he said, "That's a new one." Fast forward to exactly a month from my experience. I wake up, and the first thing out of my boyfriend's mouth is, "Remember a couple weeks ago, you heard a woman outside calling for someone? What name was it?" "John," I said. "I heard it last night," he replied. I set a reminder on my phone for the next month, but nothing happened. Really eerie. I've been trying to find out the history of the house to find out if a John ever lived there. I lived in a weird house as a kid, which resulted in chairs being moved in other rooms when I was the only one home, kitchen cupboards opening late at night when no one else was awake. I could be sitting at the computer in a lit room at night and watch as a black cloud would float through a closed door and sit, suspended in the air, across the room from me. I had footsteps that would walk outside my door and loud breathing. I was so terrified as a child that I ended up sleeping with music playing so I could tune out the noises. I still, to this day, cannot sleep without music playing. I probably could have convinced myself that most of it wasn't real as I aged, if it wasn't for a certain weird happening. It was about 11 a.m. in the morning, and my younger brother and I were waiting at home while my mother was out doing jobs. We were waiting for her to come back to pick us up, so we were sitting by the front window watching for her car. And then we heard the radio playing from my brother's room. We both didn't understand why it was on all of a sudden, so we walked to my brother's room. My brother hid behind me, and I had to walk in the room first. And the second I crossed the threshold, the radio went silent. Upon closer inspection, we realized it wasn't even plugged in, and there were no batteries in the back of it. There was no logical explanation for it to be playing, and my brother, a young boy, had a bunch of Matchbox cars and an old car playmat, and he swore and declared that he had parked the cars neatly on it, in lines. But when we went in there, the cars were thrown all over the room. Luckily, we moved out of that house, but my brother and I still remember the radio saga clearly to this day, and it's pretty much the only reason I know I wasn't completely crazy as a child. Before my girlfriend and I moved in together, my girlfriend lived alone in the house she owned. During the course of us dating and me spending the night, she finally explained some of the weird stuff going on in her home. Weird banging sounds happening at all hours. Other weird sounds. Seeing things from the corner of your eye. There were even a couple of times where we saw something walking around the house. She described it as being a robed figure, almost like the Grim Reaper. There was also the feeling that something was watching you from behind. You know, that same feeling that causes the hairs on the back of your neck to stand on end. But the worst was this constant foreboding feeling coming from one of the unused bedrooms. These happenings scared her so much, simply explaining it caused her to start crying. Now, I'm a skeptic about these things. I'm that guy that would watch all of those paranormal shows and find the logical reasoning for things happening. Since we were just dating at the time, and I really liked her, I wanted to show her my bravado and my lack of fear for the thing in the room. "Get out of this house, you fucking asshole. I command you to get out of this house," I yelled into the room. "Do not bother her again, you hear me? Or you'll have to deal with me. You do not want to fuck with me." Big mistake. Really big mistake. I spent that night at my girlfriend's. Sometime in the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up to a night terror. I had had them a couple of times before. I didn't experience anything crazy, but this instance felt intentional. It felt like I had poked a bear, and it wanted to show me that it didn't want to be messed with. I woke up to being paralyzed, heart throbbing, being able to see and hear what was around you. I could feel my girlfriend lying down next to me, and I could hear her breathing. This wasn't the scary part, though. The scariest part was hearing. Yes, hearing. Something run out of the room and down the stairs away from me and towards the unused bedroom. I could hear it make its way through the house. I desperately tried to get out of this night terror. I tried telling myself it was just a dream. I tried praying. I desperately tried to call out my girlfriend's name. I knew it was a night terror, but still couldn't get out of it. Every time before, I could get out of a night terror by reminding myself what it was. She somehow heard my whispered calls and woke me up. I did not go back to sleep that night. Yesterday, my sister woke up and witnessed what she believed to be an evil spirit. It took the appearance of an onryo, or vengeful spirit, possessing a white gown and red eyes. It was standing nearly as high as the ceiling and was slouched over. It was estimated to be 7 to 8 feet tall. My sister claimed to have a feeling of dread upon seeing the figure. Note that I was asleep at this time, and my sister had been sleeping on the floor. At first, I didn't believe her at all. I thought she was seeing things. But then I began seeing things. I still dismissed it as natural. However, Ever since today, my sister gets these crippling stomach cramps whenever she enters my room, where the sighting took place. The cramps go away whenever she leaves the room. I do not experience these cramps, and my sister never pulls pranks or anything of the sort. I recently caught more glimpses of the figure, but nothing much else has happened to me, aside from feeling dread as well. Our other friends didn't believe us when we told them. After a long time researching, my sister's problem still persists, and it's starting to get worse. My family is starting to have problems and arguments as well, and I feel that it will continue to get worse if action is not taken. Is it a ghost or a demon? Or could it perhaps be naturally explained? Because at this point, I'm just not sure. I just hope we can remove the problem and continue on, because everything is starting to fall to pieces. I cannot guarantee that my experience is paranormal, but I can definitely guarantee it is causing a lot of problems and issues throughout. Please help. Thank you.
After I had already been away for work for several months, my wife had to move us to Virginia. She found a pretty house to rent, almost lavish by our standards and plenty of room, very modern. Well, she would call me while I was away and say she was having bad dreams and felt like someone was staring at her from the bathroom closet area. Also, our daughter was pushed so hard she fell down and thought my wife had done it, but she was sitting on the couch 10 feet away. So, I made the usual prescription when we had run into this before. I told her to put a very powerful crucifix in the room blessed by the Pope and told her to shield herself with white light before going to bed. I came home about a month later and immediately felt a presence. It did not take long to figure out that the presence was in a large closet area which adjoined the bathroom and faced directly towards the bed in the master bedroom. The closet area never got natural sunlight and was extremely dark at night. I could feel that something was watching. The crucifix seemed to keep it out of the room, but it still stared from the closet, so I did the usual. Get out, this is my house, I command you to leave, etc. I felt that this thing was not going anywhere, that it was not scared at all. It was not moving. Not long after that, we found a picture of our children on the floor, and it had been smashed in the middle of the frame like something was thrown at it. One night, while watching TV, my wife left for work, and I saw a rather large shadow fly out of the bedroom and out towards the car as she was leaving, almost as if it was chasing her. Not long after that, she suffered a stroke and a major car accident, both of which left no lasting injuries. I was again traveling when I returned home. I learned that the landlord was kicking us out. I was glad and realized that we had to get out quick not to be followed, but my wife severely scratched her eye while moving and that slowed us down. The last day, as we were moving, both my wife and I were out on the back lawn under the window not far from the closet, and we both heard a tapping on the window. No one was in the house. I knew what it was the whole time due to the strength of the presence, that it was a demon. The last night, as I left, a neighbor stopped me to talk and I could see this shadow filtering around the yard. Unfortunately, it followed us to the new house, but it was full of sunshine and good karma. It opened doors and I saw it a couple times in the hall. It also bothered my son who saw it in the basement. I told him to ignore it. Do not feed it with fear and you'll basically bore it into leaving. I have seen, run into, ghosts and the like, but this was different. Very different. The only option is to get out so fast that it cannot follow. This thing could travel. It was crazy. So, in short, it has stopped bothering us and life is normal again. But it is a learning experience that there are some things that you cannot will or scare away, and that will do some major damage to you if you are not aware and able to leave before tragedy happens.
I had a bad experience about 4 years ago. I think that I might have brought something with me when I went to that country where they worship demons, praying and giving them offerings so that they don't get troubled by them. I went to visit ancient sites when they had a lot of those worshipping hotels. I was kind of curious and I approached a lot of those. At times, I felt like my ears were blocked, like I couldn't hear properly. Afterward, I began to have weird and bad thoughts. Very unusual coming from me. After I returned home, I felt weird. I was seeing shadows out of the corner of my eyes. I was surprised to find myself talking to them many times. One night my daughter woke up around 1 a.m., crying, just to tell me that she had a bad dream, that she had seen me being sucked up by a black tornado. I sent her back to her room and went back to sleep. At exactly 3 a.m., I woke up from a nightmare. My heart was pounding like it was going to burst out of my chest. I never, ever felt my heart pounding so hard in my whole life. Then, suddenly, the TV turned on by itself. I got freaked out and told my husband about it. Having not found any explanation to this, we went back to sleep. The following night, same scenario. Nightmare. Woke up at exactly the same time, 3 a.m. Heart pounding. TV turns on its own, showing some worshipping temples, the same kind I saw in the country I visited. I prefer not to mention what country and what religion were those temples out of respect. The day before, I had tuned the TV to the channel that has shows on spirituality. This time, my husband prayed in front of the TV and then went back to bed. On the third night, I went through the whole thing again. Nightmare. Opened my eyes to look at the clock's red numbers. 3 a.m. I got really pissed. I woke my husband up and I said, "That's enough." I wasn't afraid anymore. I told my husband, I brought it here. I'm the one who has to kick it out. A sudden strength filled me, and I started to pray loudly, claiming clearly that my family belonged to God, and that I wanted this demon out of my life, and that I wasn't afraid of him. My whole body was trembling, and the TV started to turn on and off until it finally turned off for good. I never felt so strong in all my life. Ever. I was like a lioness protecting her territory and challenging an intruder. I never had problems after that night when I stood up to it. But I was curious to know why 3 a.m. The weekend after, my pastor told me the whole thing about the evil 3 a.m. hour. I was shocked. I am relieved to see that I am not the only one that it occurred to. Maybe differently, but still the same hour.
I was around 15 years old and went to visit a very well-known friend of mine. She lived in a very big house, well maintained. It was my first time visiting as my parents were very strict and I had limited time with my friends. As I walked into her house, I got a chilled feeling over my body that made my hair stand up. I ignored the feeling as I did not want to scare my friend and spoil our bonding time. We watched movies, etc. While watching movies, I got a shiver over my body and I immediately felt an unpleasant entity in the room with us. I could not sit still and felt uncomfortable as I could feel it was staring at me. My friend asked me what was wrong, and I said that I have a tummy ache. I got up and walked to the kitchen to get some water. As I turned around, there it was. This demon-like creature, not sure what to call it, stood there, grinning at me. It was a very dark figure with red eyes and sharp yellow teeth. I remember it like it was yesterday. I just stood there frozen with fear. It came toward me like teasing me and chased me around the kitchen table with a knife in its hand. I lost contact with my friend, and until this day she has no idea why I left. I feel bad for not telling her what happened. I think I was just so terrified, and the thought of seeing it again actually quite scared me.